Lost Judgment, the very first game in the RGG series to have a simultaneous worldwide release, came out on PS4, PS5, Xbox One, and Xbox Series on the 24th of September 2021, with it then later getting ported to PC almost 12 months later on the 14th of September 2022. It was released after Yakuza Like a Dragon and was released before the currently most recent game, Like a Dragon Ishin. It was the first game in the series to get a post-launch expansion known as the Kaito Files, which came out roughly 6 months after the initial release. I believe it ran at 30 FPS on previous gen consoles, so PS4 and Xbox One, with it running at 60 FPS on current gen consoles. I bring that up because in the video on Judgment, I mentioned the likely cause of the remastered version of that game having a completely different lighting scheme. From what I've heard, the game runs perfectly well on a PS4 and an Xbox One, and so it would further point fingers at things such as the lighting causing the game to lag, because Lost Judgment is coloured a lot differently from Judgment. There were likely other optimization tricks involved, but I just thought that it would be interesting to bring up. The game being a direct sequel to Judgment plays exactly like it. However, there is one important thing to note, and that is that Lost Judgment is the best goddamn game these people have ever made. Woo! Now, while I did say in the very first video of the series that anyone can enjoy and play whatever they want, if you haven't played Lost Judgment, the only proof you need that this is the best game in the series is that this was the first and so far only game in the series where there is a take a dog for a walk button in the menu. This is why Lost Judgment is better than most video games, because the only other game I can think of that has a take a dog for a walk button is Nintendogs, although it doesn't have a make dog kill things button like in Final Fantasy 16 or Metal Gear Solid 5. Anyway, before I get into new or different stuff with Lost Judgment, I thought I would mention some things from previous games. First of all, I've mentioned it 100 times, but literally forgot to mention it in the video in Judgment, but in Judgment, and by extension Like a Dragon and Lost Judgment, sprint was changed to a toggle, and by default you can sprint infinitely. They also added an additional button for it, being R2 or RT or whatever, and to address people that bring this up, you don't sprint automatically in Judgment and Lost Judgment in combat, and that's because you have to hold the sprint button to do so, which honestly is for the better. Also, with evading you need to hold the fighting stance button and press evade to evade, but if you tap evade without holding any directional input, you will dodge backwards, but it kind of seems like that only works when an enemy is attacking. I don't really know how it works. But yeah, fun fact. Judgment also added a feature which I'm sure no one cares about, where if you hold the camera reset button, you will disable the auto camera, which I absolutely love, and it's the best for recording stuff. But then from Like a Dragon, we have Like a Dragon's version of Kamurocho, which you can definitively tell by the weird invisible wall behind this one taxi, as well as Lost Judgment having the new area of Yokohama. Yokohama saw a couple of changes, but the only really important ones are a little shortcut added here on the west side that I love, a couple of changed buildings, and a big fat high school that just appears where a chunk of the story and a majority of the side content takes place. And the final thing is the ability to call a taxi anywhere on the map and fast travel to any fast travel point, all from your phone, which was added in Like a Dragon. And guys, guess what? When Infinite Wealth comes out, you apparently won't even need to do it from your phone, you can just do it from the map. How awesome! Lost Judgment also has kept in the ability to be hit by a car, which yes, people pointed out you can do in Yakuza 5 as well, so my mistake. But in these two games, you do get flung through the air and will take damage in both games. The character head cut-ins at restaurants and battle dialogue things from Like a Dragon are reused in Lost Judgment, although they are styled a bit differently. And finally, this isn't from Like a Dragon, but technically it is. You can't run through bushes out in the open world, but weirdly, when you're in combat, you can. However, Lost Judgment made it that you can always run through these bushes, so that's very nice. But anyway, I will now gush about all of the new and exciting things within Lost Judgment, and yes, I will go into as much detail as I possibly can, because this game deserves it. Firstly, when an enemy drops an item in combat in previous games, you normally have to go walk over the item. Nothing wrong with that, but sometimes you can miss an item by accident, or when your inventory is full, you kind of have to abandon the item there. In Lost Judgment, however, items will magically gravitate towards you, which is such a nice little quality of life feature, and I love it so much. When I play all the games, I expect items to fly to me, and then they don't, and I get upset. But you can even max out your inventory on a specific item, have one of those items drop, then go to the opposite side of the map and sell some stuff, then that item will still fly all the way over to you. It's amazing. And as if the taxi convenience wasn't already convenient enough, Lost Judgment added weirdly specifically a skateboard to the game that you can use anywhere on the main streets by holding the sprint button. It's a little weird to control sometimes, especially when you're even the slightest bit intoxicated, but it is incredibly nice to go down a straight road just a little bit faster, especially when you unlock faster skateboards or just if you have the DLC one. This is another feature, much like toggle and infinite sprint or just sprint in general, that I massively miss when I go back to older games. Lost Judgment's help section, which is a bizarre thing to bring up, I know, is actually like really good in comprehensively explaining the whole game and genuinely giving it a read, taught me things things I never even knew about. If anyone who worked on the help section watches this video, I'm sure you're all giddy that I'm the first person in history to ever mention it, so you're welcome. But now the final thing before I move on to the combat. In Judgment, Yagami had a selection of detective things that he could do, all of which were kind of various pains and various asses, but they all have been improved in Lost Judgment. To start, the game opens with the tailing mission, similar to Judgment. However, unlike Judgment, this one is significantly shorter, and tailing missions are also much less annoying, the NPCs move a bit quicker, and you can hold a button to act natural, meaning you don't have to go hide in a specified spot. And speaking of, it's a little finicky sometimes, but you can hide basically anywhere. And that's not to mention the best part of the tailing missions, that being that this first one is the only one in the entire game. How awesome is that? Lockpicking also returns with a cool little 3D display to it. It feels a little more lenient than in Judgment, and also there are literally only 2 locks in the entire main game that you have to pick, which is yet another awesome thing. Thumb turn bypasses may or may not be in this game. Maybe? They're not in the main game, and I don't remember them at all showing up, so I'll double check in the edit, and I'll have the answer on screen right now. And also the answer as to whether or not they still suck. Chases from Yakuza 3, 4, 5, Ishin technically, Judgment, and that single one in Like a Dragon return in this game. By the way, I forgot to physically say that in the Judgment video, but whatever. Chases in Lost Judgment are closest to the Yakuza 5 ones, where you have to wear down your target's health without your own health dropping. They also had some pointless parkour and these little, choose the correct path things. The investigations are pretty much the exact same, although you don't get SP from examining non-important items. At the same time, they feel like they're a lot more stripped down, which means they're typically faster to do, and they're also much less frequent than Judgment. The 2 new things added to Lost Judgment with stuff is some parkour and some stealth. The parkour really is nothing special. It's not like Assassin's Creed where you can scale any building you want, nor is it like Based, Titanfall 2, which is back online. Oh my god, my life, it's finally back together again. Yeah! Titanfall 2! Then the stealth sections, which are quite... Stealth is never really good in any game, and this game is no exception. You don't have a lot of freedom, and you always have to go to specified points to flashbang a guard or to distract them or something. And if you do go to those points, you can't leave them without doing one of those 2 things, which is very strange. I can't exactly say I was really expecting much from these stealth sections, but now I move on to easily the best part about this game, being the combat. Firstly, this game still has Yagami's Crane and Tiger fighting styles, but adds a brand new one called Snake. It's green, which is my favorite color, and it's an iron wall defensive style. You have a parry you can do by holding guard at the right time. The evades have you bob and weave rather than shifting your whole body in a direction, and it has a unique mechanic called EX Surrender. If an enemy is inflicted with fear, you can do a heat action on them, which will instantly KO them. It's not anything too special, but it is a unique tool you can use in fights, and it's again similar to Yakuza 5, where you can one-shot dudes that are in fear and on the floor. Snake style can also disarm enemies by throwing them, which prompts you with a little QTE, which when successful will make the enemy drop their weapon, unless it's a blade or a gun, because then the weapon will be destroyed. And then also for some bullshit reason, Kali Sticks will explode. Come on Sega, just let Yagami use Kali Sticks, please. If it wasn't obvious, the Snake style was added to both expand the gameplay and to complete the classic Chinese martial arts reference of Crane, Tiger, Snake, and Dragon fighting styles, with Dragon being Kiryu's fighting style, as Yagami still does not have a Dragon style. However, he does still get a 4th fighting style in the form of the boxing style, a DLC style that takes all of its animations and skills from the boxing minigame that Lost Judgment has, as well as a few minor animations being taken from Tiger. Swapping fighting styles is also now much faster, where you can mash the button super fast and swap between all 4 styles almost instantly. There's no abilities like what Kiwami had, where you can actually instantly swap to a style after evading or something, but it's still a lot faster than swapping styles in Judgment. Speaking of the speed of things, there are no combo speed upgrades in this game. However, your default combo speed is actually the max combo speed from Judgment. Gone are the days of having slow combo speed for most of the game. Woo, yeah! SP has now also been massively inflated, meaning that you earn a lot more, but abilities cost a lot more. You still earn SP the exact same way as the last game, but now there are abilities that you can unlock that grant you more, a buff that you can get from eating at a restaurant to get more, and accolades that you get in combat that reward some bonus SP. These accolades range from doing things like defeating an enemy without taking damage, performing a heat action, and defeating an enemy with one of the default fighting styles, with a special bonus being given if you do that with all 3 styles. Combine that specific accolade with the increased speed at which you swap fighting styles and a bunch of unique abilities for those fighting styles, and you'll notice that the game encourages and rewards you for constantly swapping around the styles. Speaking of abilities, Crane finally gets its own upgrade in its dedicated skill tab, alongside Tiger, Snake, and the boxing style. Some of these abilities are heat actions, while others might be things like unique counters that the styles all have. But speaking of these unique things, this game has a shitload of unique animations that were added in this game. And because it's my channel, I'm going to tell you about as many of them that I can think of. The first thing to get out of the way is obviously heat actions Yagami has that has only ever appeared in Lost Judgment, or the heat actions that are specific to one fighting style. But anyway, Yagami in Judgment had a sprint attack you could do by pressing the sprint button where he'd slide tackle enemies, which was mostly pointless if I'm honest. But even still, in Lost Judgment, each fighting style has its own unique sprint attack, except for the boxing style, which reuses the tiger one. But then there are 4 unique fighting stances, with all 4 getting their own ones, as well as all 4 having their own guard stances and animations, all 4 getting their own heavy and light dash attacks, which are different from the sprint attacks as you press light and heavy attack. The 3 base game fighting styles all have their own throw animations, their own heavy grab attack animations, and while Crane and Tiger share their pummel attack and grab animations, Snake gets its own throw by pressing light attack, as well as its own grab. Boxing doesn't get any grab animations, as you can't grab with the style because pressing the grab button makes you punch. Every style gets unique evading animations, as well as each of them getting unique evade strikes. Every style has a unique basic heavy attack animation, and all 4 have unique counter attacks. Although, with these counter attacks, Crane and Tiger's are traditional ones where you hold the fighting stance button and press heavy attack just as you get hit, and in Judgment, these were both Tiger drop. But now in Lost Judgment, Crane has a kick called True Crane Beast Slayer, and Tiger has a massive, super heavy looking punch called Dragon Crushing Fist, which is ironic because Dragon style has Tiger drop, and now Tiger has Dragon Crushing Fist. But anyway, Snake's counterattack is like Komaki Parry, where you have to press the grab button, but it weirdly only works when you're not in heat mode. Boxing also gets special counters, which will activate the style's secret and hidden arts, which is a new ability that all 4 styles can get, with them being secret and hidden arts of the Tiger, Snake, Crane, or Champion. These give various buffs, with Tiger giving an attack buff, Snake giving you unbreakable super armor, Boxing generating your heat faster, and Crane making your combo speeds dummy fast, which by the way, the Crane's one is just the best ability of the entire game. Also, this game removed the annoying mortal wounds mechanic, and instead replaced it with mortal reversals, where a strong enemy will go to do a big strong move, and you can dodge at the right time and do some sort of counterattack. All 4 styles get their own unique attack, and in all honesty, this mechanic is really freaking easy to deal with. Every style has a unique get up attack, which you can do by pressing the heavy attack button, although Snake's is actually by pressing the grab button, and you can only do it when an enemy is about to attack you. Now, the only clip I could ever record for Serpent Hold, as it's called, is against the final boss, so I won't show it here, but I will show it later in the video for reasons. Snake can at least make use of an attack where you swap to Crane style while knocked down, with Tiger and Boxing also having access to it, but that one's not really the best. All 4 styles get unique taunt animations, and there are actually 2 different types of taunts across all styles. The first one is if you click the taunt button, where you will taunt every enemy. This taunt also is, fun fact, an attack. The second one is when you hold the fighting stance button and click taunt, which will only taunt one enemy. In EX boost, just like with Judgment, all the styles get their own unique heavy attack, with Crane, Tiger, and Boxing getting a combo, and Snake getting a single grab. With Tiger, unlike in Judgment, you can actually charge each attack in this combo, which allows for some insane damage. Besides Boxing style, the 3 main ones also get their own unique grab attack in EX boost, which replaces your normal grab. These aren't the most useful things in the world, but they do at least look cool. And finally, each of the 3 base game styles, as Boxing shares some stuff from Tiger with this, have their own unique leapfrog and wall jump attack animations. For the wall jumps, the styles have their own unique light attack animations, heavy attack animations, and grab animations. Boxing shares its heavy and grab attack animations with Tiger's light and heavy attacks, but it does get its own light attack animation. With the leapfrog attacks, all the styles once again get their own heavy attack and grab animations, and Lost Judgment also added the ability to do a light attack from a leapfrog jump, which all 4 styles get their own unique one. So that means all 4 get a unique light attack animation, grab attack animation, and all but Boxing get their own heavy attack animation. I hit my microphone, that hurt. And there are many more things that are unique between the styles that Lost Judgment added, but I wanted to try and mostly focus on things that weren't unique in Judgment, but were in Lost Judgment. And also, I don't want this video to be longer than 26 minutes and 27 seconds, so I'm moving on. In Judgment, they added these items you could use called extracts that I completely forgot about until I was writing stuff for this video. These items, when consumed, allow for many different things, whether it's a buff or unique attacks. For example, there are a bunch that were DLC in the PS4 version of Judgment, but came with the base game and the remastered version that allowed you to press a button and dance, or shoot fireballs, or just instantly kill everyone you hit with a big blast. However, I obviously barely touched these things, so I have no idea what's in Lost Judgment that isn't in Judgment, or the other way around, or anything like that, so just pretend that I had a really detailed section here. Alright, another thing in Judgment was that there were various rubbish bags scattered around the map that you could destroy, which would then reveal a weapon that you could use. The weapon was always random, but I would get bloody soccer balls 99% of the time instead of something cool like nunchucks or a tonfa. Lost Judgment got rid of that feature, but they instead placed many more weapons in specific spots around Kamurocho and Yokohama, meaning you have a more consistent access to different weapons. Lost Judgment also added back climax battles or ultimate challenges or whatever that were removed in Yakuza 6 in the form of the Gauntlet. The Gauntlet is a selection of specific specific challenges that range from do this within a certain amount of time to fighting enemies or a boss with some sort of specific condition. In the history of the series, sometimes these challenges can be a bit of a bitch, and typically the reward you get for beating them all is never really worth it, besides Kiwami 1, where it is most certainly worth it. But I've always enjoyed these special challenges, and Lost Judgment's no exception. Although weirdly, each challenge gives you a reward for completing them, but some give you skill books to unlock new skills, such as Crane's counterattack, and you can't get those skill books in any other way. Lost Judgment added back a feature that is a Tekken 4 player's worst nightmare and a Yakuza 4 player's wet dream, being wall bounding. This is where a character, when hit, will be pressed against a wall and can continually be hit into it to extend the combo of the other person. However, I think that wall bounding is a terrible name for it. I mean, if you replace the D with a C, it's wall bouncing, which makes more sense, but also because this mechanic is more accurately titled, oh for God's sake! To reference Tekken again, this game made juggling incredibly easy. You could juggle opponents in Judgment, or if you were fighting Higashi or the final boss of Judgment, you could get juggled, but there is unfortunately quite a strong damage cap on juggling, where the more you hit an enemy before they recover, the less and less damage they take, meaning that a lot of the time a charged target finisher will just be stronger. But speaking of bouncing and what have you, Judgment rid the world of the annoying feature from 6 where your attacks can bounce off of an enemy's guard, but if you hit an enemy as they were pulling out a weapon, your attack would still bounce off them. In Lost Judgment, that's not a thing at all, so that's very based. And the final gameplay mechanic I will discuss are status effects. Likely a carried over idea from Like a Dragon, this game added a lot more status effects. Before, the only status elements that existed were Fear and Rage, which only affected enemies, and then Stun, Shock, and Burn, which affected you and the enemy, although with how they worked, the ones that affected you weren't exactly like status elements in an RPG. By the way, Judgment actually added back Fear and Rage, which was removed in 6. Fear is when the enemies go all purple and scared, which might happen if you pick up a big weapon or do some strong attack or something. And Rage was typically when you taunted an enemy, or in some games might happen when an enemy is the last one standing or something. Rage covers them in red and makes them just relentlessly attack you. Then Stun, Shock, and Burn are kinda obvious. However, the new ones in Lost Judgment were Agony, Blind, and Bleed, although technically Bleed is from Like a Dragon. Agony, when inflicted on you or the enemy, prevents the victim from evading, as instead they'll just sort of trip over themselves. This can be inflicted on you with certain attacks, and inflicted on enemies with mostly the Snake Styles charge finishes. On regular enemies, this is only really useful for doing hit actions, but on some bosses it can be quite helpful, as again, it prevents them from evading. Blind, I believe, can only affect you, but it makes it so that you can't actually target enemies while holding down the fighting stance button, and these bloody pricks with their goddamn pocket sand are the blokes that'll give it to you. Then finally, Bleed can be inflicted on you from certain attacks, typically from blades or guns, and holy Christ, is it really strong, and does like every enemy in the game have something to inflict bleed on you. But while that's all for gameplay features, there is something in the overarching gameplay that is definitely worth mentioning. That being the visuals. The game has insane particle effects. There are definitely a lot of games out there that do a much better job with strictly particle effects, but in comparison to previous games, Lost Judgments looks so cool and detailed, and it adds a lot of emphasis to the power of your attacks and style effects. It's not just the particle effects too, but all visual effects in this game are massively improved from previous games, making this a stylistic bloody masterpiece. The chromatic aberration is actually well done, and is one of the few games where I actually enjoy seeing it. The vignettes that surround the edges when you swap styles, and the slight blurring and cloning effects to really emphasize Yagami in the center of the screen, the motion effects of attacking and dodging, the auras, just the everything. All of the impact effects precisely timed to be just enough that you see it, but not enough that it clouds the screen with stuff. Modern day gamers will say the Yakuza games look ugly because the road textures are admittedly like 12 by 12 pixels stretched over 100 meters, or they'll say the games aren't stylish because they use a realistic art style and realism isn't unique. Screw all that shit, this game makes my eyes come. It's one of the most visually stylish games I've ever played, and to me, I hadn't seen anything quite like it since Destiny 1 and 2, because in the Destinies and Lost Judgment, there are so many effects that just add little details in order to add a lot of style, and this is something applicable to every Yakuza game, but the sound effects, the animations, the music, the tight controls, the satisfying impacts, Jesus Christ. These games are awesome. And honestly, I've barely even scratched the surface of all the new good shit in this game. They added a conversation log, a bunch of new fun and useful skills and hit actions, like some really cool disarming hit actions for Snake, or an overpowered Komoki knockback style ability for Tiger. You can beat up children, equipable gear was added back, a shitload of fun side content such as like a million new minigames and arcade games. After you beat the game, you can watch Kaito sleep, Jun gets to eat food with you in the Kaito Files, a D's nuts joke, you can beat up children, you can befriend cats, you can make it look goofy, but Yagami's got new running animations and jacket physics. The game has the most in-depth final section of the entire series, the amazing boss fights and the sick dynamic intros. They added Pepsi back, and it's thankfully not the sugar-free one they have over there, because Pepsi Max in Australia is 100 times better than regular Pepsi, but in Japan it's utter dog shit, don't know why. And speaking of sponsored stuff, they got an energy drink that's actually really useful because it charges your heat over time. You can beat up children, there's a heat action with the dog, the skateboard can be used in combat, you can use the skateboard to beat up children. This game is perfect. When it comes to gameplay and style, there is not a single thing I can fault Lost Judgment for. Except I would like to be able to get rid of the stupid button prompts. I know how to play the game, guys. Just like the previous 3 games, this game also has a dub, but unlike the previous game of Yakuza Like a Dragon, the game unfortunately doesn't have any reanimated facial animations to match the English audio. Despite that, it's still very good, but if I'm honest, out of this, Judgment, and Like a Dragon, I have to say that the performances and the script writing in Lost Judgment is the best, and if I'm being especially honest, is some of the best stuff that I've seen just from any English media in general. It helped that the behind the scenes people now had a lot more experience under their belts in producing things, and the actors that appeared in Judgment having more experience in playing their characters. Speaking of actors, Takuya Kimura, the actor who plays and portrays Yagami, is someone who I have never played the multiplayer of Ghost of Tsushima with. Greg Chun, the English voice actor of Yagami, is someone who I've played the Ghost of Tsushima multiplayer with, so already that's 1 point to Greg Chun and 0 to Kimura. But before I move on from the dub, I have a fun little story to tell. Crispin Freeman, the English voice of Kaito, is a well-renowned voice actor who started his career before I was even born, and he has his own little podcast called Voice Acting Mastery, where he shares stories from himself or guests about the various processes involved with being an actor, as well as tips and advice for listeners to learn from. One such listener was a young man, although I say young, but he's definitely older than me, named Paul Castro Jr., aka big massive Kingdom Hearts fan, which obviously means he's an absolute beast. But anyway, on a special episode of Crispin's podcast, namely the second part of the 10th anniversary special, Paul gave Crispin a call, telling him how much he loved the podcast and how much it helped him grow and expand his career. Now, this was back in August of 2021, which was before Lost Judgment came out, but anyway, cut to a few months later when the gang are working on the upcoming Lost Judgment: The Kaito Files, and Crispin was listening in on the actor who was playing June, who was basically Kaito's pseudo-son. And would you believe it, the actor for June was a young man named Paul Castro Jr. And when Crispin learned this, he was like, hey, I know you had a call on my podcast. And personally, I believe that to be a very touching story, that a big role model and mentor for Paul was Crispin, and here they are working together on Yakuza's first ever good DLC. And if you're interested, Paul was then later on Crispin's podcast, being episodes 188 and 189, where they recount that exact story. Now then, it's time to move on to the story. The story is, not as good as Judgment, but that is because Judgment's was so good that it's hard for anything they make afterwards to compete. In saying that though, it's hard to describe, but Judgment's story was so stand out, I guess, that it always felt like it was written by a completely different team of people. But Lost Judgment feels much more in line with the story you'd expect from the other Yakuza games. Judgment was much more plot-driven, and Lost Judgment is a lot more character-driven, and in saying that, the characters in Lost Judgment are amazing. Very surprisingly, most of the characters from Judgment do show up in Lost Judgment, besides characters who had very obvious reasons for not showing up in the sequel. Those characters with their arcs already in the past don't experience much growth besides Yagami, as he's the protagonist, so those other characters aren't too involved, but involved enough to the point where it isn't actually like the previous Yakuza games, where they just hit Control-A, unselect Kiryu, then hit delete. However, Tsukumo, who was an incredibly unimportant NPC who was basically just a tutorial for the friendship mechanic from Judgment that got ditched in Lost Judgment, weirdly is one of the main characters in Lost Judgment, and he's actually pretty important, helping out Yagami for most of his endeavors throughout the game. But the new characters really are the biggest strength of this game. The plot starts out sort of, as you weirdly investigate a high school bullying situation, but unlike what a certain Australian game reviewer thinks, this section lasts for all of 10 nanoseconds and is almost 100% filled with beating the shit out of a bunch of high school twats. So already this is the best thing ever made. But then when it gets away from that and gets into the main premise of the story, it sort of has the same premise of Judgment's story, where Yagami is attempting to solve some murders, but sadly it is nowhere near as intricate or exciting. But where Judgment had the best written story, Lost Judgment easily has the best written antagonist ever of all time in history forever infinity million. I'm gonna spoil who it is, although it's not like it's some secret identity, but just instead that you don't know this character's true role, yada yada. So if you don't want any spoilers, you can click on the timestamp that I'll chuck in the description, or just try and skip ahead yourself. Just like how Judgment had a villain who for the first time was an X, Y, or Z sophisticated man who desires power, Lost Judgment carries that tradition and has an equally as unique antagonist. But instead of it being a psycho who likes killing people, it is quite literally just an ordinary guy who's just trying to do the right thing. Kuwana is the main antagonist of Lost Judgment, but he isn't a villain. It is instead that his views and goals simply oppose Yagami's. But in saying that, he's also friends with Yagami and his whole gang, and many times throughout the game, Kuwana shows his disdain for fighting against people who shouldn't have to get involved with all the stuff he he's doing, being of course Yagami & Co. This dynamic is very different to something like Kiryu and Ishiki, where they were family that was torn apart, or Kiryu and Ryuji, where there's a mutual respect between the two of them, as instead Kawana and Yagami work together quite frequently, and a lot of the time Kawana will run away from Yagami in hopes that he'll stop trying to stop him, because Kawana doesn't want some innocent bystander like Yagami to get hurt. Kawana is an incredibly kind and caring person who presents Yagami, or more realistically the player, with a series of complex moral dilemmas. Sure, he could go about what he's doing in a much less violent way, but he wants the death of innocent children to not just be echoes in the wind. He wants to bring solace and peace to the parents of these children, and he will do anything to protect them and everyone else that's on the right side of the world. He's no one special, he's not trying to be a hero, he's just trying to make up for his own past mistakes and atone for his own sins. Someone does eventually get caught in the crossfire, and compared to previous antagonists, he doesn't just go, oh well, and instead feels such horrific remorse. But he can't just give up, because without him, there'll be no one left to shoulder his burden, and so he continues forward doing what he feels he needs to do to hopefully one day bring some change in the world that's for the better. Yagami, on the other hand, just basically says, fuck you, it's illegal, Sawa-sensei, dragon-crushing fist. But anyway, beyond all that, the story is very good, and much more emotionally driven than Judgment, which is why it's more of a Yakuza story, and also because it has Yakuza cameos like Zhao and Kashiwagi. Moving on though, actually, hang on. Welcome back, spoiler skipper. We're going to be talking about the Kaito Files now. The Kaito Files, again to reiterate the point, was the first ever good DLC of the Yakuza series. It's not very long, and I have spoken about it at length in a video back when it came out, but it's short and sweet. The main gameplay has you play as the titular Kaito, where he has two fighting styles known as Tank and Bruiser. These are actually Beast and Brawler from Yakuza 0 and Kiwami, with only slight few differences, such as Kaito getting EX boost. The characters in the Kaito Files that you're supposed to like are very likable, and the ones you aren't supposed to like are very unlikable, although I say that in a good way, as that was the intention. Considering it seems like an infinite wealth, they're bringing back as many characters as they can, it seems like RGG Studio are finally going down the path that they should have always gone down, where they won't waste such good characters. Because in all honesty, before the details of the next two games were revealed, I honestly believed with all of my heart that if there was ever another Judgment game, characters like Jun and Kaito's lady friend probably wouldn't appear in the next game, and you probably wouldn't ever get to play as Kaito again. But these days, I believe that if ever there were a Judgment 3, or at least the potential for a cameo for a Judgment character to appear in one of the main games, we would get the exact opposite of my fears. But also, Greg Chun knows how to correctly pronounce my username, but Takuya Kimura does not. So that's now 2 points to Greg Chun. Then finally, there's the soundtrack, which is so good. Bringing in a lot of the usual talent of their super cool composers, they've also got some new people. Satoshi Okamura is a brand new guy who I believe is now a mainstay, given that he did a lot of work on Lost Judgment and RGG Studios' most recent Super Monkey Ball game. Then there's Mitt, or maybe accurately MIT Gathering, who did a lot of the boxing minigame songs. They also worked on the remake of Like a Dragon Ishin, and this is purely a guess on my part, but I assume that they were probably responsible for the remix of the song Fly in that game, but again, that's just a guess. But besides all of that, there are so many songs in the game, and so many of them are incredible. The Kaito Files kept that momentum going, adding in only a very small handful of songs, but all of them are again incredibly well done. It's always the same thing for me when it comes to the soundtracks for these games, but honestly, I think the main reason why is that these aren't just good background tracks for a video game, but they're actually just good songs. I mean, think about how the karaoke songs ironically have become hit songs in the real world. But anyway, here's my final note for this video. It's common knowledge at this point that most people's favorite is Zero. Some are because it's the only one they've played, some love it for being their first, and others just plainly love the game. But by saying Zero is the best, in a way it unintentionally implies that they peaked with Zero and got worse and worse over time, although for the most part that's not a direct thought amongst these people. But I have to say that if you can't criticize something you love, you don't love it at all. I love Zero, and I have plenty of complaints and criticisms for every game in this franchise, but I cannot ever possibly deny the fact that RGG Studio are constantly getting better and better. They're fixing their mistakes, making improvements, creating experiences that last with people until the end of time. But I mentioned Zero in this video on Lost Judgment because this was the last game localized by the team that localized Zero. Now, I discussed in my video on Yakuza 0 both the incredible work that this team has done for this franchise, and also that it wasn't a completely new team, but just instead that a lot of key members departed after Lost Judgment or had already departed since then. For example, Sam Mullen left Sega in 2022 well after the release of the Kaito Files, and Scott left the Yakuza team after finishing Lost Judgment's main game, although he is still at the company just doing whatever he does now, I don't know. But someone like Scott, although people wouldn't really think about this, is a very creatively talented person who has a knack for being very good at writing and directing dialogue. It's thanks to people like him and his team for where the series is at today, but now this in essence new team have been bent over backwards working their asses off on Ishin, which came out at the start of this year, and now Gaiden and Infinite Wealth coming out within 2 bloody months of each other. So I have to say, if any of you guys from that team are watching this, firstly, can I have infinite wealth early? Not because like content creator stuff, but just because I want to play it. But secondly, good luck with the next 2 games coming out very soon. You're gonna bloody need it. And Scott, if you're watching, I hope you enjoyed all the praise I've been giving you in these videos, because I'm gonna tell everyone right now that Scott Strickhardt gave up playing Tears of the Kingdom because he sucks and couldn't beat the tutorial. You suck, Scott. You suck. Anyway, back to the viewers. If you like this video, thank you for watching. If you like this little series I did, thank you very much for watching that. If you're like me, you're probably also very excited to see where the series goes from here, and you're just as excited to experience the constant growth of these teams, especially since Zero, yet again in November and January. But at the end of the day, if there's one thing to take from me, it's that you should buy Lost Judgment. And also like and subscribe and